Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narotamam Devyam Saraswatim Vyasam Yojayam Udirayat Nasta Prayeshva Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Utama Shloke and Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. We understand we can take any verse from this chapter, 23. Yeah, okay. That's 10, 23, 30. This is the wives of the Brahmins who have come out to feed Krishna and Balaram. And when they come, Krishna tells them, oh, you should return to the sacrificial arena because your husbands are householders and need your assistance. and they are objecting in 2 verses here. So this is the second of the 2 verses. Grinanti no napataya pitaro sutava. Na bratri brandu surida kuta eva chanye. Tasmad bhavat prapadayo patitat manamno. Nanya bhaved gatir arindamatad vidhehi. Grinanti no napataya pitaro sutava. Na bratri bandhu surida kuta eva chanye. Tasmad bhavat prapadayo patitat manamno. Nanya bhaved gatira rindamatad vidhehi. Grinanti no napataya pitaro sutava. Na bratri bandhu surida kuta eva chanye. Tasmat bhavad prapadayo patitat manamno. Nanyad bhaved gatira rindamatad vidhehi. Grinanti no napataya pitaro sutava. Na bratri bandhu surida kuta eva chanye. Tasmad bhaved prapadayo patitat manamno. Right? Synonyms together, please. Grinanti, they will accept. Bratri, brothers. Bandhu, other relatives. Surida, and friends. Kuta, how then? Eva, indeed. Cha, and. Anye, other people. Tasmat, therefore. Bhavat, your. Prapadayo, at the tips of your lotus feet. Patita, fallen. Atmanam, whose bodies. Na, for us. Na, not. Anya, any other. Bhavet, there can be. Gati, destination. Arindama, or chastiser of enemies. Tat, that. Vidhehi, kindly bestow on us. And translation together, please. Our husbands, fathers, sons, brothers, other relatives, and friends no longer take us back. And how could anyone else be willing to give us shelter? Therefore, since we have thrown ourselves at your lotus feet and have no other destination, please, O chastiser of enemies, grant our desire. Purport. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments as follows, quote, from the very youth, the Brahmins' wives had heard about Lord Krishna's beauty, qualities, and sweetness from the womenfolk of Vrindavan village, and also from the flower ladies, the betel nut sellers, and others. Consequently, they always felt ecstatic love for Krishna and were indifferent to their household duties. Their husbands, seeing them as deviant, doubted them and avoided dealing with them as far as possible. And now the wives of the Brahmins were ready to formally reject their so-called families and neighbors. And out of great agitation, they were crying and placing their heads upon Lord Krishna's lotus feet, offering obeisances. In this way, with choking voices, they spoke the above verse. They begged that Lord Krishna bestow upon them the benediction that he be their only destination, that he, the chastiser of enemies, subdue all their enemies, those difficulties obstructing them from obtaining the Lord. The wives of the Brahmins simply wanted to serve Lord Krishna, and this is pure Krishna consciousness and ecstatic love of Godhead. So, it's a dramatic portion of the 10th canto. Beautiful, beautiful chapter. Just wanted to explain these commentaries were written actually mostly by Gopi Pranadhana Prabhu and Dravida Prabhu in the 10th canto. In the 11th canto, and I guess 12th canto, Hridayananda Maharaj wrote most of them. So these tend to be a little bit more concise and quote Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur a lot. There's not a lot of commentary in this chapter because it's so self-explanatory. So let's reflect for a moment upon the mentality of the wives of the Brahmins. Generally, the duty of the wife in the Varnashram system is just to obediently serve the husband and support whatever activity the husband may be pursuing. But the wives were unable to bring themselves to commit to that duty because of their intense love for Krishna. This is why this section and subsequent sections on the gopis just embody the highest standards of devotional service. Now, the Varnashram system is just meant to be a guideline, a helpmate for living and negotiating this material world. But all the Varnashram and all the Vedic injunctions are set aside when there's love for Krishna. Similarly, in the mood of the unalloyed devotees, the preachers of Krishna consciousness may or may not be bound by all the formal regulations and practices of the Vedic tradition. As far as possible, they are observed, but if it is one or the other, the Pancharatrika Vidhi or the Bhagavad Vidhi. The Bhagavad Vidhi is more important. Bhagavad Vidhi means the preaching movement. Pancharatrika Vidhi means the rituals, the deity worship. So the deity seva is very important to attract the minds of the materialists and to engage those on the material platform, essentially, engage their senses, engage our senses in the service of the Lord. And that is all very valuable, as Prabhupada set up temples all over. But the mood of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is that whomever you meet, wherever you go, tell them about Krishna. So to the best of our abilities and according to our situation, we try to spread Krishna consciousness. This is more in the mood of bringing these conditioned souls in association with Krishna, just as we used to discuss a lot in the 70s, was in the Madhurya Rasa, the Nikunjayuno Ratikeli Siddhikaya mood, making tasteful arrangements for Krishna to be with his devotees. Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhu Kabhino. Everybody has love of Krishna in their heart. The devotees are serving Krishna by just trying to bring the misled servants to Krishna's lotus feet. It's analogous to a story in the Bible you may have heard called the Prodigal Son. So in this story, the older man has two sons, and he has the elder son is very obedient and works on the farm and takes all the responsibilities to serve the father in the father's pursuits. The younger son, however, says, look, I'm going to get half of this estate. I want my half now. I don't want to wait till you die. I want my half now, and I want to go and live my own life. So the father gives it to him. And then he goes to the city and he squanders all of the money on intoxications and prostitutes. And before long, he is just completely broke and ashamed and feels so foolish. So he tries to work in the city, can't find any work, so he goes crawling back to the farm, hoping to get hired as a farmhand on his father's farm. So when he returns, far from being upset with him, the father is overjoyed, and he's so happy to have him back that he prepares a big feast and a big festival and welcomes this prodigal son back to the fold. So the older son is miffed. I'm here taking all the responsibility, doing what I'm supposed to do, following everything, taking all this care. And yet when this errant brother of mine returns, you have, for me, nothing, but for him, a big festival. So the father says, because you are not a parent, you cannot understand the love that the parent has for the child. So that's sort of how the pastime ends. So it's a parable, how much God wants the jivas back, even if they're errant. It doesn't interfere with his affection for them at all. So we might compare the elder son to the Brahmins. They were doing everything right, according to the Vedic rituals, but they did not understand the heart of the deity whom they were nominally worshiping. You see? They were more attached to the externals, to the rituals, than the actual goal, which is to develop love for Krishna. It's said that if your rituals don't help you develop love for Krishna, what good are they? And on the other hand, if you have love for Krishna, what is the need for rituals? So they play a role, but it is a subordinate role to the purpose of preaching Krishna consciousness. So this is a great struggle in our movement right now, because in India, well, let's back up a little bit. When Prabhupada was here in Columbus in 1969, there was no ISKCON in India, and there were very few devotees of Indian descent. There was one brahmachari, as a matter of fact, of Indian descent, who was from Columbus and was killed in an automobile accident. It was a real shocker, the first devotee who had left his body. So the point is that Prabhupada saw the preaching mission first and foremost and brought it to the West and succeeded. And then he took the disciples back to India, and that attracted, although he had been there for 25 years trying to preach and had virtually no response, very few supporters. When he came back with the Westerners, then people took interest. And the Westerners also, Prabhupada turned to them, please help us build these temples in Mayapur and Vrindavan and Bombay. He asked that the devotees in New York City had been raising money through prasadam sales, sticker sales, book sales. They had $100,000, which is a lot of money in the bank, to buy a new temple in New York. Prabhupada asked them to send it to Bombay to buy the land in Juhu, and they sent it all. But that was very much the mood, to help get Krishna consciousness going in India. Whatever Prabhupada desired, devotees were very sacrificing. So after some time, the movement began to grow in India. And then after Prabhupada's departure, particularly, it became extremely popular. The Mumbai temple, the Juhu temple, for example, was not open. Prabhupada had left his body before it opened, just a couple of months before, which is very tragic. But that was the first really dynamic, impressive temple in the municipal areas of India. And then The Vrindavan temple had been opened 2 years earlier on the far outskirts of that town. And, I was there for the opening, and you couldn't even get a rickshaw from there, from Krishna Balaram. You had to walk a mile to get a rickshaw to go into Vrindavan. It was so much out in the boonies. Now it's like Mumbai at rush hour. And temples have come all around. So that's just an example of how much impact Prabhupada's movement had in India in the years subsequent. So the political and social climate in India is such now that ISKCON is seen as a protector of the conservative values, you see, right? And that's prized by the people very much. They greatly appreciate that ISKCON stands for the Vedic tradition, and the deity worship in ISKCON temples is unparalleled. And it is the conservative aspect that is appreciated by the bulk of people in India. In the West, meanwhile, because the devotees were really not cared for properly, I would say, in the early days, we gave of ourselves, we just gave everything without any thought of the future. And just completely surrendered to the preaching mission. That was totally the mood of practically all the disciples of Prabhupada. We thought that we'll just preach, and we'll get married, and we'll live in the temple, and our kids will go to Gurukulas, and everything is all set up for us to just be lifelong preachers. And then reality set in after 10 years or so that no, the temples weren't going to support householders. The temples were not going to be able to provide for families. They were just, thank you very much for your years of service. Now you're on your own. That was pretty much what happened. So many devotees became estranged, bitter, disappointed, and the young people, intelligent young people, would see, what is my future in this movement? And so not as many would take it up wholeheartedly as before. So the temples were stressed, and where temples were formerly supported by straight preaching activities of book distribution, now the devotees desperately had to turn to selling non-devotional things like paintings and stickers in order just to pay the bills and keep the lights on in the temples. So gradually, Prabhupada arrived in America just at the time when immigration for Indians had been liberalized. I mean, it's just like the timing was just amazing. Even that visa application form that he got in the mail only happened because the American government had liberalized immigration from India. So totally unbeknownst to Prabhupada. So then many Indian families started migrating. The cities started filling up with Indian families, not filling up, but many families settled. And the ISKCON temples were the oasis for them. And in nearly all cases, the first temples of any Varnash or any Vedic tradition in these American cities. And so the Indian congregation started coming just at the right time when the young Westerners were pooping out as far as giving financial support. The Indian community stepped forward and saved the temples. So that has been the trajectory for many years, since the mid-'80s. And more, the temples are focused on developing their congregational support and depending on and relying on and thriving with their congregational support. And the devotees from the congregations are not just giving money, they are chanting, they are getting initiated, they are serious devotees. So naturally, these devotees feel, well, look, I've become Krishna conscious in my environment, and others can do that too. And why aren't the Westerners joining? And why aren't the locals joining? The most dedicated preachers are recognizing that and taking steps to address it. Meanwhile, in India, so let's go. What does it take to get the locals to join? You cannot give them a sheaf of regulations to follow to be devotees. They're just not interested. They have to be spoon-fed, just as Prabhupada did on 26 Second Avenue. Oh, very good boy. It is because it's such a vast cultural transformation. Add to that the fact that Prabhupada was Prabhupada, the brilliant, charismatic, wise, loving figure, this very senior mystical presence from India, which just suited these seekers and what they were looking for. But instead of making them all Google-eyed about him, he made them attached to Krishna, which has, sustained our spiritual lives even in his physical absence. So the Westerners, the locals, require liberal approach. They cannot ingest all of the Pancharatrika norms up front. They may mature to that, but they can't take them up front. Meanwhile, in India, the Pancharatrika adherence of the ISKCON temples is highly valued. And that's what sets ISKCON apart. And that's why people support ISKCON. So naturally, the devotees in India look at the devotees in the West and say, you're struggling. It's because you're not following these Pancharatrika rituals sufficiently. That's your problem. If you followed strictly like us, you'd be flourishing like we are. Unfortunately, that is the mentality. That's the reality. And therefore, there's the tension between the temples in India and the temples in the West. So sometimes devotees from India come and travel in the temples in the West. And they go and they see congregations that are primarily from the Indian community. So the mood is, oh, well, this is our audience. Why should we liberalize anything? The Indian congregations can't appreciate us. They're coming, they appreciate us. So the locals don't come, what can be done? Therefore, all the highest principle of everything is following the rule of the Vedas to the letter. And we are having a tremendous struggle now within our movement, but between these two factors. So I asked one of the leaders of the Indian Yatra, one of the main leaders, I said, have you or anybody on your leadership group, the Indian Bureau, recruited a non-Hindu devotee in the last 40 years? And he said, no, not that I know of. So they just have no concept of how to do it. The question is, how important is it? Now, if we look objectively at Prabhupada's mission, there's no question. Nirvishesha, Sunyavadi, Paschatya, Desha, coming to deliver. I mean, we all say it every day. He came to deliver the Western countries, Paschatya Desha, from impersonalism and voidism. That is his mission. How would Prabhupada feel if we have said, well, actually, the descendants of the Bharat race, of the Indian diaspora, that's our field. How would he feel about that? We know how he felt about that. When the devotees in Africa were finding success in the Indian community, he said, no, where are the locals? And he moved a program scheduled for him at a Hindu center to a center in the African area of town and opened the doors. And people come in, get free food. And it was tough. It was tough. There was, when Prabhupada was there in Nairobi, he had his laundry done, hanging on the line outside. And then when they went to collect the laundry, it was all gone. And that evening at the program, the African brahmacharis showed up, and one was wearing Prabhupada's kurta and one was wearing Prabhupada's dhoti. They did not get the concept. But Prabhupada insisted, don't just make these temples for the Indian diaspora. Same thing in England. The devotees first went there. They were finding some sympathy amongst some of the Indian national residents there, immigrants. Prabhupada said, no, you have to reach the locals. So they went after the Beatles. In Hong Kong, Prabhupada sent Borijan Prabhu, and it's very difficult there, very difficult for him. The only interest he found was amongst the Sindhi business people in Hong Kong, but they were interested. So when Prabhupada came to Hong Kong, they had arranged a big program on the penthouse floor of the Hilton, And many big prominent members of the Sindhi community had come with their wives and families, and Prabhupada was speaking to them. So he began his lecture by saying it was not Mahatma Gandhi who drove the British out of India, it was Subhas Chandra Bose. Right? I mean, Gandhi is pretty much a deity for most. And he said it was Bose who organized the army, the Indian National Army in Singapore, from the defectors from the British recruited Indian soldiers. And he was working with Hitler so that any of the Indian soldiers who defected would be sent to Singapore to develop this army to help defeat the British. So they were allies. But this strategy, Prabhupada was saying, actually worked. So after the lecture, yeah, I mean, you can imagine how these people felt. What they came to hear was something different. So after the lecture, Burijan was wondering, why did Prabhupada say that of all things? And then he went to Prabhupada, and so Prabhupada, were you implying that as Subhas Chandra Bose organized an army of Indian expatriates, so you are also organizing an army of Indian expatriates in various parts of the world to help spread Krishna consciousness? He said, yes, you've understood my point. That was his point. So this is our challenge in our part of the world. Now, the demographics in ISKCON have swung from all locals to largely diaspora. Now, to bring it back to the middle, the army of immigrant Indian families who appreciate Krishna consciousness need to balance that congregation with an intelligent approach to the local preaching. That intelligent approach requires us to set aside as many details from the Pancharatrika Vidhi as possible. That's just the fact. You can't ask somebody to step into Krishna consciousness and observe this and this and this and this and this to start. Otherwise, you're not worthy. You're not doing the whole thing. So we saw, here's an example. When Srila Prabhupada went to India with his first young disciples, some of them stayed, and there were no ISKCON temples. They stayed in Gaudiya Math temples. And when they came back, they brought with them some of the cultural norms that were observed in these temples. For example, ladies would be in the back of the room. And ladies did not do deity worship. And so in the West, the men and women were, the early temples, there was no men's side and women's side. Everybody just stood shoulder to shoulder. Sankirtan time, van opened, men, women, everyone just piled in the van. That's how it was. That's what, and there was a great deal of enthusiasm amongst the young men and women who had a brother-sister-like relationship and were accustomed to this coeducational environment. But after these devotees began bringing back, well, if you really want to be Krishna conscious, you have to observe these. Then all of a sudden, it was men in the front, ladies in the back. Women were not allowed to give class any longer. And many restrictions were suddenly introduced that were not there before. It was during the latter years of Prabhupada's life. And this phenomenon was manifesting as young men were becoming brahmacharis, and they were in the preaching army. And at one point, a senior member of the GBC proposed and got passed a resolution that all women who joined in ISKCON should go to Australia, a former penal colony, because that way the brahmacharis would be protected. The GBC passed this resolution. They brought it to Prabhupada, was furious. Yeah, I'm just saying, another example, an anecdotal story, but it shows the mood. A GBC in Europe told, there was a senior devotee who, Jyotirmayi, very erudite learned lady who was Prabhupada's principal French translator, both for lectures and his books. And so she would give classes that the devotees appreciated very much. But the new GBC came in and said, well, no, we don't want ladies giving class. You can't give class anymore. And so she wrote to Prabhupada. This new GBC says, I can't give class anymore. And Prabhupada wrote to the GBC member and said, why can't she give class? There's no restriction from women giving class. There's no difference between men and women when we're preaching Krishna consciousness. He wrote that. She found that letter in the GBC's trash can. He never showed it to her. He threw it away. And somehow by Krishna's arrangement, she was emptying the trash and found that letter. I mean, this was the degree of repression that was considered a higher standard of Pancharatrika practices, you see? And so that is our dilemma now. We are trying heart and soul to reach a wider audience. And our sincere devotees from the Indian community recognize that, yes, this is Prabhupada's mission. We have a problem. It's the elephant in the room in the West, that our temples are primarily full of people from the Indian community. And we just, okay, temple's going on, it's all right. We don't want to rock the boat. So in order to get the essence of Lord Chaitanya's movement to the locals, we have to put aside these Pancharatrika regulations as much as possible. We're not going to compromise on 4 regulative principles. We're not going to compromise on chanting Hare Krishna. We're not going to compromise our principles to just allow cheap devotees to join. But we are going to focus on Lord Chaitanya's essential mission, which is to get people to chant the Hare Krishna mantra. We are going to focus on getting people to understand Prabhupada's books. And practically we see that when young Westerners join, young locals join, they slowly rise to whatever level of Vedic practice that they are comfortable with in their lives. Some of them go all the way. Some of them want to be very strict Brahmins, every I dotted and T crossed. And some of them want to wear shorts most of the time and Hare Krishna t-shirts, and they chant their rounds, and they have hair and they go to work. You know, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Those things are secondary, just as the Brahmins' rituals were secondary to their wives' devotion. So this is the struggle that we face right now in spreading Krishna consciousness in the West. Our dear God brothers in India, who are so well-meaning and have done incredible things, opened so many huge and beautiful temples, they don't understand our needs in the West. Therefore, they say things like, women cannot initiate. It's not Vedic, which immediately insults half of our audience. The people that we need to come in and revive our outreach are basically saying, I want nothing to do with this movement. I don't want any, I don't want to be part of this chauvinist, misogynist organization. And you see, Prabhupada was asked about this. Can women initiate in your movement? He said, why not? He was asked by a professor. He said, if a woman is qualified, can she not be a professor? He said, there are some, but not many. Some, but not many. And that's all we need. Most women are not going to be inclined to take that service. But if there's none, that's not the same as some, right? If we have some, we can say with integrity that, yes, you are not this body. It doesn't matter what gender you are, what nationality you are. Just chant Hare Krishna. You can have every spiritual opportunity in this wonderful movement. That's just one example, and there are more. But the mood of the wives is the mood that we seek. And their love for Krishna was unfettered by any sort of ritual practices. Okay, so any comments, any thoughts about this little history? Yes, Prabhu. The GBC who threw away that letter fell down. The GBC man who did that fell down. Yeah, he could not maintain his service. And the GBC body has voted twice that each part of the world can make their own decision about cultural issues, like specifically about women giving diksha. Each part of the world, that's their decision. That's the devotees in India don't want it. The devotees in the West want it. So each part can make their own. It's fine. In fact, Prabhupada writes in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that you cannot impose the cultural values of one part of the world on another. He uses the strongest possible word. He said it's impossible. That word he said is in a fool's dictionary. He used it in that regard. He called it niyamagraha, trying to follow the rules and regulations blindly and not for the sake of spiritual advancement. So the GBC body has very wisely said that different parts of the world can apply accordingly. They said it twice, but the leaders in India that have been pushing and pressuring, no, it can't be done anywhere. It should never be done. It's against the Vedic rules. Very questionable evidence on that. Like the Nimbarka Sampradaya, for example, which is the closest to ours in terms of Radha Krishna worship. So many female gurus, you know. But in any case, the GBC has acted wisely, but they're being bullied and pressured, frankly, by the leaders in India. No, you can't do that. If you do that, we're going to leave ISKCON. So this is why there's a lot of tension. But we learned from the Shastra, we learned from Prabhupada that what is actually important is giving people love of Krishna. And no, it's not impossible to bring Westerners to Krishna consciousness. It's still very possible. We just have to make it as accessible as Srila Prabhupada did on 26 2nd Avenue.
Srila Prabhupada was also very straightforward. What would you suggest with the locals when we are trying to speak the philosophy to them? Should we go directly straight to the point, like speak about the soul directly, reincarnation topic, karma, or should we go slowly introduce bit by bit instead of giving it hard on?
Right, regarding, yes, philosophy, yeah. Regarding the philosophy, in other words, if we're presenting Krishna consciousness, should we give the full scope of it, the soul, reincarnation, karma, or should we just do it very delicately? Here, have a simply wonderful. It has to be given straightforwardly, but it is a matter of degree. The Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishnadas Kaviraj says that the principles of religion are established not by logic and debate, but by the behavior of the devotees. So if the individual is ready to take philosophy, yes, we give it. But if they're not ready to take it and we try to give it and jam it down their throats, then they're not going to want anything to do with us. So a devotee has to have the full arsenal of options and try to understand the person to whom they are presenting and then present accordingly. Not all 12 cantos at once. You know, the parrot-like repetition of philosophy may have been the best we could do back in the day, in the early days when devotees were young and not experienced. But now, 50 years later, we ought to know how to be tactful. And ultimately, palena parachiyate. If what we do works, that's the highest principle. Prabhu?
For example, was how you explain. Right. And I have a question, like, since you're saying like Prabhupada, in one sense, Prabhupada approved that there being like Diksha Gurus, but he also said that cultural conventions cannot be imposed. So I read this on Facebook that what if like disciples of Diksha Gurus in the West, but they go to India and they're not like recognized, that they're just like not yet, or like isn't that create like a in the society? Wouldn't it be universal? Like,
well, if you ask my opinion, it should be universal. It should be universal. that was very much Prabhupada's mood. When he was in India, Prabhupada had his female disciples stand up in front of large pandal audiences and give lectures, lead kirtans. He was not shy about it. But at the same time, I respect the devotees in India. They've done amazing service. So if that's their strategy for preaching in their field, I have no problem with it. So what could be done about disciples of female gurus in the West who might go to India? Maybe their initiations won't be recognized, but that's up to the Indian devotees. Maybe they won't even be allowed in the temples. That's up to the Indian devotees. The female Diksha gurus may have to let their disciples know, that your initiation may not be valued or respected or accepted in India. So they can have that caveat before taking initiation.
Like there's other have been like we see like also on TV like speaking in different parts of India, not like this is unrestricted to it. It surprises me that we are the society that's like not have that.
Yes, and that's because see, again, the strength of ISKCON in India is its conservatism, and this is a conservative value. So they're saying this will be appreciated by our audience. At least some leaders feel like that. Yeah, and they're very outspoken about it. When he was asked, again, Srila Prabhupada was clear. He said, I want all of my sons and daughters to inherit the title of Bhaktivedanta and initiate disciples. He said that in a letter, but the opponents say, well, it's just a letter. He said to the professor, yeah, we should have some but not many, or we have some but not many. But that's just a professor. He was just trying to placate people. They say in one purport in the 4th canto, when Suniti instructed her son, Dhruva, to go seek Krishna. And if one purport, one sentence, Prabhupada writes, Suniti could not be Dhruva's Diksha Guru because she was his mother and a woman. So women cannot be Diksha Guru. You see, that's all they have. That's the only Shastra that they have to back up their position. But that one sentence becomes the Mahavakya of the entire Srimad Bhagavatam. And of course, we don't take it in context. This was Satya Yuga. This is just the very beginning of the population of the universe. And Dhruva's alternative was to go to Narada Muni. And so many factors were there that make that very contextual, not absolute. Meanwhile, we can throw out all the preaching to the non-Hindu communities because of that one sentence. It's very skewed. So the objection that comes up, what about these disciples going? It's a very minor point, and it can be easily handled. If they want to take a hard line, then those disciples just won't be able to go, or they won't be able to do any deity worship or whatever.
Leaders in India.
Well, I love them. I love these leaders in India, even though we disagree. I respect them. I see where they're coming from. I feel sometimes they don't see where I'm coming from. They don't ever listen to me. I try. I asked several times, could I address the leadership group and explain these points as a Western preacher? And they've just not allowed me to do it. The Vasu Ghosh, the most outspoken person, I've challenged him to debate several times. He won't debate me. He can't defeat these points. So he will debate other people who are not active preachers, but he won't debate me. I challenge him. I'd be very happy to do it anytime, but he runs from me because he can't answer these points. Or as he travels in the West and he sees the temples are full of Indians, and he says, so let's be real. He said, this is where the temples are, but it's not where the temples should be. And he sees that with the Krishna House program, we are making devotees from all communities. But so he doesn't want to hear about it. Hopes it will fail, but it keeps growing. All right? All right, any other thoughts? Anything online?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Can you hear me?
Hmm. Mm-hmm. For progressive training. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Cultivation. Yes. Yes. Um, so this can be done. Progressive cultivation can be done for devotees primarily of Indian descent who live at home and have already an inherent value for the Vedic culture. They can be cultivated in this progressive, gradual way. For the non-Hindu community, it's a different thing. They can't go as far in most cases. Some rare cases, they can become serious fixed-up devotees living at home, gradual cultivation, if somebody, as you say, gives them a tremendous amount of care and attention, and if they have more or less submitted themselves to that person as their guide. That's the exception. For the most part, people of non-Hindu extraction need to have an ashram immersion experience to acculturate, to change their cultural values to the Vedic way. They need to live in, they need to immerse themselves, they need to have the daily sangha. And this is why the ashram is absolutely critical in expanding our scope and our audience. The ashram makes it possible for people to make that switch, make that change. And they gradually come up to a point where they're ready to make the plunge and stay in the ashram for a while. Then the real conversion takes place. And because our ashrams have withered and died in most of our temples in the West, that conversion experience is rarely happening. So it is reviving the ashram culture of the early ISKCON days that Srila Prabhupada established. He wanted brahmachari and brahmacharini ashrams in every temple. He wrote that in 1969. That is what will make it possible. And you see, here in Columbus, you're at a disadvantage because you don't have an ashram. We've had people from Columbus go all the way to Gainesville just to get the ashram experience, right? And we had people from the Gainesville ashram come and do service here in Columbus. But we need to have the ashrams more accessible. And then you can close the deal. If you're cultivating somebody who's not of Indian extraction and you're bringing them up, then you have this step. Okay, how about if you try out the ashram for 3 months? You can still go to school. You can still work. That's all right. But live in the ashram where you can have the daily sangha and be with others who are in your position and learning. And in the ashram, the standards are comfortable, relaxed, just like 26 Second Avenue or Haight-Ashbury. Just come and chant. If you want to live in, you have to chant 8 rounds and you have to follow the 4 principles. So if you can bring somebody up to that point, then they can have that conversion experience. Like Brihat came into the ashram in Gainesville, I'll provide for a month, right? Right? you become convinced to the point where I'm willing to try this for a month, right? Oh, and he was such a case. So that you're at a disadvantage here without an ashram, and we really hope the current temple can become an ashram in the near future. That will make your college preaching, bring it to a whole nother level.
to a certain point, follow the four regular principles and chant,
Mhm.
then we suggest to them.
Yes.
Once they're in there, there might be has been there for 4 years, someone who just came, there might be different degrees of how they're following. How can we not people feel like we are doing something better than you? And how can we just make the ashram like very welcoming for someone who just came in?
Well, that's that's the job of the ashram leaders, to make it welcoming and make people who are brand new feel comfortable. It can be done. Right. That's why. Well, if the ashram is properly structured, then it won't be much of an issue. And part of that structure means we don't impose a bunch of Pancharatrika standards. Everyone who's living in the ashram knows that when we're taking the ghee wick around, it goes to whomever is nearby, male, female, whomever. We maintain a standard in the ashram that men and women can interact within certain limits as friends. No electronic communication, no private meetings, no revealing one's mind. I have a spiritual question. Can you help me, Prabhu? Things like that, we have to teach them. So to a limited extent, there is freedom of interaction, and everybody, whether they've been there 3 days or 3 years, they know that's the standard. We've had in the past some brahmacharis kind of get to a point where they're being told, oh, this is Maya, this Krishna house informal intergender association. This is Maya. You can't be a brahmachari here. And so they start having their own classes, and they start, treating the women poorly and feeling themselves superior. That happened, and then some of them fell down. Some of them went out and have been nice brahmacharis. That's fine. And we don't have any malice towards them. It's just that mood doesn't fit in Krishna house. It doesn't fit if we want to make a regular, consistent flow of newcomers from the local cultures. I mean, you've been in Krishna house 3 years. Have you experienced that? That have you ever felt like, oh, this is a lower standard, I should develop a higher standard?
Yes, since I like all the patients, something like more conscious, like how to be like make it more welcome. So that's very, like it's just like not like just me and Krishna, but we're trying to bring Krishna consciousness, how to be more gentle and
Yes.
more caring for them. Just like be their friend, not tell them what I do, you should do this. Just being their friend.
Yes. It takes a lot of tolerance on the part of the devotees who are more seasoned to have interaction with people who are so oblivious to so many cultural things. And one of our principles is the ashram leader should always be the one to instruct them. Yes, yes. Not everybody, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong. Who wants to live in an environment like that? So it requires a lot of tolerance, which is one of the Vaishnava qualities, right? And look at the tolerance that Prabhupada exhibited, sharing his shower with the hippies waiting in line, keeping his boga in a refrigerator with cat food. He was tolerant because that's what it takes to, you can't expect people to start off on the highest level.
They're inspired and they're ready. They
can. Yes. Right. When they will, that's what the beauty of the Krishna house system, that they will gradually rise up to the level of their own realizations and practices, but with that foundation of compassion and tolerance for others. All right. Yes, I'm fine. I don't want to bore you.
It's very clear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Is it a factor in our lack of local outreach that devotees feel it's beneath them, that they should be on the higher levels of Shastra and 10th Canto and don't want to go back to chapter 2 of the Gita and give the ABCs? This is your question. Yeah. In some cases, it may be a factor. I would say in maybe neophyte devotees who don't really understand Prabhupada's mood and mission. Srila Prabhupada spoke on second chapter on and on. You listen to those early lectures in New York City and in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, even a little later on. He was very foundational, very basic. He didn't hide Radha Krishna, but he didn't emphasize Radha Krishna. And when there was a group of devotees in the Los Angeles temple in the mid-70s who were pursuing some of these more esoteric sections of the Shastra, Prabhupada heard about it and he chastised them. Who are you to be discussing Radha Krishna Leela? More than that, what is the actual experience of Radha Krishna Leela? To me, it is bringing new people to Krishna consciousness, making those tasteful arrangements for the prodigal sons to meet their father, which brings great pleasure to the father and to the son. We can read about Radha Krishna Leela, but we can also participate in it in the mood of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Yes, right, which is just, it's blissful to present the basics to a receptive person, isn't it? There's no higher taste I've ever experienced in Krishna. I have never felt as ecstatic reading about Radha Krishna Leela as I have seeing somebody's light bulb go on. Right?
It's a relish like yes, that gives
It gives us great happiness. When Srila Prabhupada was asked in New York, when we, in the late 70s, 76, he was asked, when we retire, Prabhupada, can we go to Mayapur and just hear and chant? Prabhupada said, you may do that. I'm not advanced enough. Any questions from the probably everyone has to go to work by now, but.
Prem Chandra Prabhu, do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
One question, Prabhu, is how far do we go in not following the Pancharatric Vidhi to bring new people to Krishna, like Krishna West? Might have heard of Krishna West.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about? I mean, is it like they're also trying to attract?
Yes.
Take up Krishna consciousness. So what? And some people have said that this is going too far, not having the proper attire and things like that. I don't know what. So what is your suggestion?
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, I can't speak much about Krishna West because I don't know much about it. I don't advocate it. I don't follow it. I feel like if we want to reach mature and capable people, they could pretty much make their own decisions about what they wear. Okay. If they're not capable of that level of independent thinking, then I'm not sure we want them in our temples. The eternal message of Bhagavad-Gita is relevant to every jiva. And the challenge for the devotee is to enable that jiva to see the relevance in their lives. As Rupa Goswami says, Yena tena prakarina mana Krishna naveshayat. Somehow or other, think about Krishna. The rules and regulations can come later. So we don't make an issue about what people wear as long as it's modest and not meant to sexually attract other people. We don't make an issue if they want to wear dhotis or they want to wear pants, they want to wear saris or they want to wear skirts. It's not. It's just not important. So I don't feel it's necessary to regiment people's attire in any way. The diet, which is another cultural facet, that should be flexible. People like to see familiar foods, excuse me, as prasadam. That can make them feel more comfortable making the leap into Krishna consciousness. And we're certainly not restricted by any kind of pancharatrika requirements. You know, patram pushpam balam toyam. That's the extent of it. Yes, it may be for a highly cultured person, they're going to appreciate rice dal and the sabjis, and that's fine. But it shouldn't be mandated one way or the other. What is going to work is really the issue. And you know, I think Krishna West has the right idea in terms of being flexible culturally, but practically they haven't brought a lot of new people into the fold. Let's put it that way. They have attracted devotees who are already established devotees to try other preaching approaches, which is great. But as far as practically being a center where new people are coming and taking up Krishna consciousness on a wide scale, that hasn't happened yet, to my knowledge. In any case, what we advocate at Krishna House has really nothing to do with Krishna West. There's perhaps some overlap, but it's unintentional. What we advocate is having ashrams where the cultural barriers are minimized and the philosophical aspect is emphasized, so that people can embrace the philosophy without having to change their cultural position. Isn't this what Prabhupada said over and over again? You know, just add Krishna consciousness to your life. Don't have to change things dramatically. Can't compromise on the four regulative principles. Can't compromise on the chanting of the holy name. You have to do those things. But if you're willing to do those things, then everything else is a detail. Those are the principles. Everything else is a detail. How you want to live your life, how you want to pursue your life. You'll, if you're intelligent, you'll figure it out. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pridipurvakam. Krishna will give you the intelligence. We have to trust Krishna. We have to trust the intelligence of the people we're preaching to, not try to control them and force them into some kind of a cultural mold because it looks good to us. They'll figure it out. Is that all right?
Yes, Prabhu. Yeah. So when a new person joins your ashram, like they just decide that they want to try a month out, do they have to like go through a program, or I mean, would they want to like they have to now suddenly recite all these prayers in Sanskrit, which doesn't make sense to them? So how does one get inspired at that point? Like, because everything is
right. This is the Krishna House system that we've worked out over the last 15 years, and that is being practiced in other temples and other cities with increasing success. The newcomer is required to attend the morning program, Mangalarti, Guru Puja, Bhagavatam class, and have an hour of chanting japa each morning, 5 days a week. 5 days a week gives some breathing room on the weekends for the newcomer, which is very helpful. And they learn the Sanskrit prayers, even though when they first see them, they can't imagine ever learning them. Typically within a month or two, they've memorized them because they're very carefully displayed on an LCD screen, prominently placed in the temple room, so that the newcomer feels, oh, I was expected here. People, I'm not out of place. I'm in the right place, and I'm going to have the opportunity to learn all these things very easily, conveniently. We don't make them hold a little songbook and try to read it in the dark. So we put the words up very clearly, and also their English meaning, so that they don't feel I'm just mindlessly repeating something of which I have no idea what it means. So these nuances like this, Prem Sindhu Prabhu have proven effective. People can learn the prayers, and they gradually assimilate the Vaishnava practices. If it's given, the Mangalarti is at 6 instead of 4:30. So it's a little bit more reasonable for them to get started. Tulsi Arti is at 5, and after some time, they get accustomed to things. They start gravitating towards coming earlier and coming to the Tulsi Arti. And then they have enough time to chant 16 rounds, not just 8 rounds. So things like that have been worked out by trial and error. And wherever possible, we're implementing them with various temples in Houston and Toronto and Grand Rapids, and many other temples are now expressing interest. Philadelphia, Dallas, Delaware, Baltimore. Other temples are inquiring, how can we do this in our temple? Really, any temple can be adapted without having to change their deity schedule, without having to make dramatic changes, if they just have physical facility for people to live and somebody to manage them. That's all that's required. Along with the intention of the management, we want to start diversifying our congregation. That intention is the start, and that must be there. And this is what concerns me about Vasu Ghosh Prabhu and others in the Indian Yatra. They just have a sense that that's all we need is the Indian diaspora, which represents a tiny sliver of humanity. So opening the temples up, the ashrams up to newcomers with a modified schedule has proven to be consistently effective at bringing nice new people into Krishna consciousness.
One more question, if I may ask.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that inspires, let's say somebody is coming for the prasad at the campus, then what is it inspiring them to try out this ashram life? How do they decide?
That is the most important question. What inspires people to try out the ashram life? First and foremost, it is Krishna in the heart. There's no material formula that makes it happen. But when the ashram is ready to take care of the newcomer, then Krishna in the heart of the newcomer says, okay, you can go in. We can't control what goes on in the heart of the newcomer, but we can control the environment in which they will be coming. So we can arrange everything and be prepared for them so that when they come in, we are ready for them. What we found in Gainesville is that if we continue to keep the ashram so prepped and ready, that Krishna continually sends new people on and on and on. The other aspect of this too is that we do not hold on to people. We always have the person's best spiritual interest in mind, from the day they walk in to the day they walk out. And like a miser financially will hold on to every penny, and it brings out the bad qualities in people to hold on to their wealth. They become very heartless towards others. So if we have a scarcity of newcomers, we have a little bit of a tendency, okay, now you're our property. You belong in this temple, you join here, you are our property, which is a miserly approach. We take the broad-minded approach. What is good for you? That also creates a mood in the atmosphere, Prem Sindhu Prabhu, that is evident to the newcomer. I'm not under pressure here. I'm not going to be manipulated here. People here genuinely care about my well-being, and we do. So people come in, we help them get trained up, and we encourage them to go to other places or to go on with their careers. And we never say, no, you owe us, you have to stay here and work. Okay?
But they know upfront that they are going to.
It's also so flexible that you don't even have to spend that many years that you are in university. You can just come, and then you feel like you have to balance your study and all that. So you can go again on campus, stay on campus, but still participate in the temple programs.
Right.
Shrestha did.
Like Tracy did, yeah. He stayed in the ashram for a while, and then
6 months she went, and she was telling me that that was like the best time in her spiritual journey, that she was like so regularly attending the morning programs, and
Yes.
then she felt like her studies were impacted, so she stepped out, but she still continued to serve
Yes.
Friday programs and other morning
and
programs.
she was never ostracized. She was never criticized for moving out. She
Right.
was always a welcome member of the community.
Exactly.
Yeah, many devotees like that. Yeah, always what is good for the person. All right, so thank you for letting me pontificate here. All right, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.